And now I'd like, Zsolt will take the hot seat. And I say the hot seat not by accident, because you have the burden of explaining to us the simplification agenda, and in particular the novelties in that sense of the new programming period. And those of us who work with managing authorities have a joke, and we say, yes, simplification for the Commission means taking it away from the Commission and putting it onto the managing authority. So perhaps you can explain to us today that that isn't what you mean, and precisely what you are hoping for, the other experiences that you are now seeing in other CBC and other programs, not just CBC, of course, ETC programs, and give us some insights into what the novelties are to make ESIF funds work better.
Thank you very much. Buongiorno, dobar. Before getting into the deep sea of the simplified cost options, I would probably like to highlight some of the novelties in general compared to the 2007-13 period. One of the great achievements for ETC is that ETC finally got a separate regulation, because in the past it was part of the ERDF regulation, and it was fairly difficult to cherry pick the parts that were relevant to ETC. Now probably we sat on the other side of the horse, because now there is an ETC regulation, but it doesn't mean you can only work with the ETC regulations, because the ETC regulation, the things that are not covered by ETC regulation are covered by the ERDF regulations, which are based on the common provisions, which is covering all the funds. And this is complemented with several delegated and implementing acts. So there should be really a good understanding of the hierarchy of the regulations to work, and that especially concerns the management and control bodies. One of the great differences compared to the previous period is the introduction of the thematic concentration and the result-orientedness. In the past, it was basically possible to cover almost everything, and many cross-border programs did. So under 2 or 3 priority axes, they pegged in a lot of different thematic areas, which resulted in the spreading of the funds, which resulted in very often the difficulties to prove that the money was spent wisely. If somebody reads the ex post evaluation of 713 for the ETC, that's one of the major findings is that objectives were not clearly set, and obviously then results were not easy to communicate. And that is the challenge for the current programs, because now the thematic concentration requires that for cross-border cooperation programs, at least 80% of the budget is allocated to a maximum 4 thematic objectives. So that's how we try to promote the concentration of the funds and choosing the most relevant areas for the programs. Another important difference is that the territorial coverage is changed in a sense that in the past there were core areas and adjacent areas. Now we only have a program area, but we introduced a 20% flexibility, which means that per priority axis, a maximum 20% of the budget can be spent outside of the program area, provided these actions are in favor of the program area and contributing to the results. Just to give you an example, if somebody is treating the fight against marine littering in the North Adriatic, it is probably a good idea to involve Slovenia, because it is also there. So it's not compulsory, but there is a possibility to spend some of the money outside of the program area. The monitoring committee can decide and agrees if necessary. The lead partner principle remained. That was also already mentioned, that it is compulsory to have at least one project partner from each member states, participating member states, and then to meet the criteria of cross-border, which is the common financing, common operation, and common planning and common implementation. One way to the simplification was that the regulation established the common eligibility rules, and that is put on the highest on the level, and those that are not covered can be set by the monitoring committee, and only as a last step is the national eligibility rule applies. So we try to unify in cross-border cooperation programs which types of actions, costs are eligible and which are not. The regulation introduced new territorial tools, not only in CBC but also in the mainstream program, namely the CLLD, the Community-Led Local Development, and the Integrated Territorial Investments. And Italy is the living laboratory for these tools, because there is only one single program who picked up the ITI, and this is Italy Slovenia for an integrated development of Gorizia, Nova Gorica, and the Italy-Austria program is chosen to use the community local development based on the very long traditions of leader type, bottom-up approach development in the area. And of course, we enlarged the scope of the simplified cost options, which we believe can be a real simplification, and that is the way to simplify the life of the beneficiaries. And just to reflect back to your comments on the Commission, we also have a saying which is called gold plating. That means that sometimes the member states are creating additional rules which we don't necessarily seem necessary, but somehow they create a complication on the simplification. So there is further room for improvement to simplify the costs. And what exactly do they mean? There are three main types of simplified costs. One is the lump sum, where all or parts of the eligible expenditure of an operation is reimbursed on the basis of a single pre-established amount. And the grant is paid if this agreed activities or outputs is achieved. Just to give you an example, if a group of local SMEs decide on a project to participate on a fair somewhere in order to promote their products, the usual way is to collect all the invoices, whatever small they are, and then they make the budget and then make the claim for reimbursement. But it is also possible that this group, the project beneficiaries, make a budget, and they discuss this budget with the managing authority. And once the budget is approved, then there is a lump sum, and the money is paid when the participation at the fair did happen. And in this way, there is no need to gather and send invoices, because the eligible cost is based on the pre-discussed and agreed budget calculation. Another example is the flat rate. The flat rate is when specific costs are calculated by applying a percentage fixed to another one or several types of costs. It means that, for example, there are three types of categories. There could be a calculation of indirect costs for a project at a flat rate up to 25% of the eligible direct costs. This is, for example, if there is a project of a training course. Of course, the training course did have direct costs like producing training materials, paying the personals, but there are also indirect costs like running the office where the trainings are cost, the heating, the electricity, all the other stuff. And then this part of the cost probably can be established on a flat rate, which means that you don't need to send a monthly bill of electricity and calculate a percentage how much is paid, but the managing authority establish in advance a flat rate that maximum 15% of the indirect costs can be paid on flat rate. That's it. Another one, which is enshrined by the regulation, and probably that's one of the safe options for programs to use, is the staff cost. They can, in cross-border cooperation program, the managing authorities can establish a flat rate up to 20% of the eligible direct costs, which means that the wages, the salaries of the people who are participating in the implementation of the projects are not calculated on the salary slips that are sent to the managing authority, but there is a pre-defined flat rate of 20% maximum, and then there is no need to do the invoices. And also, for the indirect costs, which are the administrative and office costs, there could be a maximum 15% flat rate of the staff costs. So that's another further opportunity to simplify the implementation. And the last type of simplified cost is the standard scale of unit costs, where the eligible expenditure is calculated on the basis of quantified activities, outputs, or results, and these quantified amounts are multiplied by a unitary cost defined in advance. It can be process-based or output-based. The process-based is when, for example, the Chamber of Commerce is organizing a advisory service for SMEs, and the Chamber of Commerce makes an estimation, an approximation that in the past, this type of activities cost the Chamber of Commerce 200 euros a day. So instead of making the invoicing, the regular direct cost proof, they can agree that the eligible expenditure is the number of days that the Chamber of Commerce is providing training multiplied by 200 euros. And of course, once they provide the training, they can get this reimbursement. But it can also be an output-based, which means that the final eligible costs are established according to the performance of the beneficiary. For example, there is a training, somebody wants to provide an IT training, 1,000 hours for 20 trainees. So the eligible cost is calculated on the cost per hour for the training and the number of hours the company is providing for trainees. And the final eligible cost will be paid after the performance, meaning that, for example, if there are only 18 trainees who showed up in these trainings, then they get only the proportional part and not the full part. And that somehow encourages beneficiaries to really perform and deliver the results, because if in the past it happened very often that they organized a training, they got they declared the expenditure based on the cost of the organization of training, and there was another thing, that how many people arrived to this training and what was the result of this project. So the simplified cost options are also can be seen as a tool to have a shift, a change in mentality from the focus on the inputs to the focus on the outputs and results. And what is very important if managing authorities deal with any of these simplified costs is that they should be established in advance. So there should be, before the codes are published, they should be fair, so based on reality, equitable, the equal treatment, any type of project, any type of beneficiary should enjoy the same conditions, and verifiable, which means that based on documentary evidence. And then we can get to the point of the auditing issues, because what we see is that in many member states, the simplified cost options are not that popular because of the real or perceived resistance of the audit authorities to introduce these costs, because and then the threat that, oh my God, if my lump sum is 1,000 euro, but at the real cost was only 800 euros, what can be done? This is part of the system. This is the cost we pay for the simplification. We should not be afraid of that. So what the audit is going to audit you if simplified cost options are implied is that on a managing authority level that the method is correctly set and justifiable, and on a beneficiary level that the method was correctly applied. For example, if we go back to the proposed budget, that the budget is realistic and not overpriced, just put it simple like this. And if there is an audit issue, then the audit authority is going to apply a flat rate correction on the project, or if it's on a management authority level, maybe on the scheme. So that's very important. This just very briefly, and maybe just I picked up some examples from other programs. Hungary-Croatia, just not to go too far. There is a lump sum for the preparation of the project. So 3,000 euros is worth for the managing authority prepared project. The beneficiaries among each other distribute the money as they wish, as they want, and that option it's optional. They can do it, and the justification is the approved project. So the result is delivered. The flat rate is applied for calculating the staff costs. This is optional. There is a flat rate for calculating the indirect costs, which is office and administration. And that's compulsory in the program, meaning either they claim it or not, but they cannot send invoices. And there is a lump sum for office equipments, 1,000 euros, and that's automatic, you get it. For Slovakia, Hungary, very similar, but a bit more strict. For example, staff cost is also only restricted to project management activities. And then the flat rate is also compulsory for calculating the indirect costs. And Slovenia, Hungary, it's also very similar. So we can see that they are applying the staff cost, they are applying the indirect costs, and the lump sum for the preparation of the actions. This is a first step. I think what I had said before has an enlarged scope of. So this is a very modest, shy application of the simplified cost options, but it's already a step forward. And for example, now there is the discussion on the modification of the common provisions, where the Commission is proposing that for projects under 100,000 euros, the application of the simplified costs will be compulsory and not optional. That's very important because we see that we need a further impetus for making everybody believe that these simplified costs can work and can bring simplification. Thank you.
And thank you very much. I totally agree with what you say about gold plating.